most of our opinions are formed by other people's opinions, unfortunately. What's happening, unfortunately, is opinions is taking precedence over truth. Look at how India is represented in newspapers outside. It is not done as much through news articles as it is through opinion pieces, through op-eds. So, as an example, if a woman stood up and said, and this is, reverse illogic, right? I am a woman, I feel unsafe in India, therefore India is unsafe. Right? People who are looking for that kind of news would end up trusting that narrative. It is like saying कि मुझे गर्मी लग रही है इसलिए धूप है. Thank you for joining and a Shubh Deepavali to everyone. Welcome everyone. I'm going to start with a presentation. I think we have about 20 to 30 minutes for a talk. I'd like it to be fun and informal, and then we open it up to questions. So with your permission, ma'am, I'm going to start sharing the screen and jump straight into the presentation. We're talking about today about the war against fake news and media bias. And I think all of us know this very closely as Indians. And at some point or the other have suffered the way India has been depicted to the rest of the world. You see, on 17th December 2012, please note the dates here. On 17th December 2012, 3 different news snippets came in different parts of the world. One, an actor in his 40s got a 15-year-old girl drunk and sexually abused her. And I think this was in the UK. Second, there was a 29-year-old man called John Anthony Vega who raped a woman in her 70s and was later sent to jail for it. He was convicted for aggravated assault, attempted rape, involuntary deviate sexual intercourse, burglary, and a whole bunch of other counts. And this is a man in his 20s raping. Imagine how heinous you have to be as a man in your 70s raping somebody your grandmother's age. And apparently the lady kept shouting, the victim kept shouting, listen, I'm your grandmother's age. On the same day, you had a man who pleaded or pled guilty for killing a 74-year-old woman. This is a different case from John Anthony Vega. So he raped and killed a 74-year-old woman, and he was finally convicted and sentenced on the same day, 17th December 2012. But how do we in India know that day? We in India know that day for what is now known as the Nirbhaya Kand. Look, I've been very public about the fact that even one rape is way too heinous to be taken lightly. I personally am of the opinion that the strictest of the punishments need to be given to anybody who cannot treat another woman with respect, right? But look at how the narrative was spun around this. On the day you had these 3 out of many hundreds of such incidents in the West, what you saw in the media, the narrative was that only in India cows are safer than women, right? You saw articles and opinion pieces being written all over Western media. You saw images, obviously with a very communal bent. I mean, if you just look at the color scheme and the imagography that you see here, clearly it was somehow presented as India is the only country, or our culture is the only culture where women are treated the way they are, right? We've been suffering this bias for the longest time. What happens when you ignore all the other women in the West that are having to face a much worse situation and compare, and you keep highlighting India all the time, is the real victims out there in the West. The 74-year-old woman who got raped and ended up in hospital and finally dead. The 15-year-old minor child that was sexually assaulted after getting drunk. Those real victims are ignored because somebody has to peddle an anti-India agenda purely by losing sense of proportion. Right? But guess what? If you actually look at the data around sexual abuse, it becomes very easy to prove that, crimes against women is not related to any one community, any one country, any one sect, right? It is a gender crime that is unfortunately, it is global in nature. There is no country where you do not have sexual abuse or crimes against women, etc., happening. And it perhaps, purely in terms of the number of crimes that are reported and the number of crimes that are for which people are convicted, India on a per capita basis actually happens to be far better than a whole bunch of other countries. It is just that one single incident gets spoken about 1,000 times. वो बोलते हैं कि 100 बार झूठ बोलो तो सच हो जाता है. That's what has happened with India being projected as the rape capital of the world. Let's look at another quick narrative here. Most of you would have seen Slumdog Millionaire. When you watch Slumdog Millionaire, I'm sure you remember the scene where this boy falls into a pool of human feces while trying to catch a glimpse of his favorite superstar. Right? India is always projected as a country which is filthy, dirty. And this is not new. This has been happening from the times of Salam Bombay, or much earlier, in fact. Poverty porn is a real business. I mean, there are dollars and cents value to projecting India as a filthy nation. But look at Hollywood on the other hand. Whether you have Clint Eastwood, whether you have Tom Cruise, whether you have Daniel Craig as James Bond, even when they're running away from a bomb blast, they're wearing a suit. एक दाग धब्बा नहीं है सूट पे, एक crease नहीं है, and that's somehow supposed to be what the West is about. Even when the Avengers, who are bang in the middle of a very active war scene, you will not see any amount of filth, grime, blood, dust, or dirt on them, right? And a picture says 1,000 words. And what do we see when we watch pictures or movies like Lord of the Rings or Aquaman, as these two movies are from? When you look at New Zealand, where Lord of the Rings was shot, when you look at Aquaman, when you look at Australia, where Aquaman was shot, this particular scene, you tend to imagine that the US and New Zealand and Australia are really, really clean countries, right? That's the narrative that has been set through Hollywood. What does reality look like? If you look at sustainability data, if you look at the amount of waste that is created per capita, right? Look at where United States is, 26 tons per person per year, and compare it to where India is, which we are at 0.19. And now compare it to the images that you've actually seen. And it's the same story. When you leave the Hollywood narrative alone and look at data or look at facts, whether it comes to per capita waste, whether it comes to composting, whether it comes to carbon emissions, aviation fuel emissions, or even if you look at meat consumption. I mean, all of us know how beef production is the single largest source of methane pollution that is created globally every year. And mind you, all of this data is official government data, United Nations data, World Bank data. None of this is private data. None of this is something that an agency or a survey or whatever has come up with. Right? All of this is official government data, and the truth or tathya is out there for us to see. That when it comes to sustainability, when it comes to cleanliness, when it comes to waste, when it comes to carbon emissions, India has our culture, our economy naturally has enabled us to be far ahead of countries where you have school-going girls telling us how we should be managing our own ecology, right? Unfortunately, what's happened, and I use this whole example of crimes against women and sustainability as narratives that are created either by news media or any other media, Hollywood being a great example. The truth gets butchered by post-truth, as I call it. The narrative factories, the narrative engines, unfortunately, leave no scope for people to even figure out ki bhai sach kya hai. What happens though when we hit this situation? Why does it happen? Right? There's this fascinating data. It has an American context, but it's equally applicable to any part of the world. Given that we are increasingly living in a polarized world, right? People want to talk over each other, not to each other. Now, what happens here is you have the blues and the reds, the Democrats and the Republicans, who all seem to be talking to each other. The blues are an echo chamber, the reds are an echo chamber. There is hardly any conversation happening across these two schools of thought. As you can see, the density of conversations amongst right wingers and amongst left wingers is so high compared to conversations among them. This is not limited to the US alone, it is not limited to politics alone, right? Here's an example of the UK, which has a multi-party system, and how conversations are always clustered around people who have the same party affiliation or the same ideological affiliation, right? And it's not just about political affiliation, it's also around subtopics. So if you look at gender rights, if you look at union rights, if you look at education, if you look at economics, people who have a particular point of view are only looking to others of the similar point of view to get validation for what they're looking at. I mean, Sangam Talks is a great example, right? If you're watching Sangam Talks, chances are very high that you're of a particular political leaning or ideological leaning. And it would be fair to assume that not many people on the other side even care to watch Sangam Talks. I'm not saying whether that's right or wrong. There's no judgment here. It is just that we each happen to be happy within our influence group, right? What happens when we are all comfortable? If we are all comfortable just seeking validation, right? To use an Ekta Kapoor serial example, two guys walk into a Diwali party and one of them is saying, "Kya re bhaiya, aap to jach rahe ho." The other fellow says, "Nahi, bhai, tumhara kurta ekdam jach raha hai," right? And both of them end up praising each other, not knowing what's happening in the outside world. And we've taken a digital form of that, where most of our thoughts, most of our opinions are formed by other people's opinions. Unfortunately, what's happening, unfortunately, is opinions is taking precedence over truth. Look at how India is represented in newspapers outside. It is not done as much through news articles as it is through opinion pieces, through op-eds. So as an example, if a woman stood up and said, and this is, reverse illogic, right? I am a woman, I feel unsafe in India, therefore India is unsafe. Right? People who are looking for that kind of news would end up trusting that narrative. It is like saying कि मुझे गर्मी लग रही है इसलिए धूप है, right? We are all watching this and it's dark here. But if somebody gave me the space to say, because I'm feeling warm, therefore it is 40 degrees outside, then you would say कि यार अनुराग पागल आदमी है. But when the same thing happens through opinion pieces, it somehow gets accepted, it somehow gets normalized. Right? What is our response? And this is where I'd like each of you to cross your heart and think about it a little seriously. I genuinely want each of us to introspect. Every time somebody bashes India, misrepresents the truth, calls your culture or your community somehow subpar or below normal or whatever, how do you react? More often than not, we get angry. We say कि ये conspiracy है, वो conspiracy है. We go and give galis on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and whatever it is. We all get on our WhatsApp group and share screenshots and links saying, "Kya aisa kaisa bol diya isne." Now somebody goes and puts an allegation on the author. 4 people go and say, "Ki yaar, ekdam sahi bola bhaiya, aapne kya thappad maar diya," blah blah blah. I honestly want us personally, and this is just my personal opinion, I want each of us to start thinking beyond our frustration, thinking beyond our anger, and actually asking the question, ki, when we go on Twitter or Facebook or whatever and give that gali, it could be abuse, it could be gossip, it could be slander. What are you getting? What are you getting out of it? A couple of years back, I confronted somebody in Delhi that was very happily spreading some rumor about me. Right? And unfortunately, at that time, I was really disturbed by it because this person was, I thought was a friend, right? I mean, this person had come home, spent time with my kids and all of that. And then I found out from multiple people that he's been spreading rumors. And I was talking to some other person, and I said, "यार ये समझ में नहीं आ रहा है कि बस ये ऐसा कर क्यों रहा है? एक बार फोन उठा के बात क्यों नहीं कर लेता? Why can't he just get a point of view on at least what I have to say about whatever he's spreading?" And this person I was talking to, a very dear lawyer friend of mine, he said, "छोड़ो भाई, आपको क्या करना है? गुस्सा होके आपका BP high हो रहा है. It is somebody else's ignorance or insecurity because of which they are saying and doing whatever they want to say. Why are you getting worked up about it?" And it made a lot of sense to me. And unfortunately, I see a lot of us getting worked up and responding in angry ways, which only end up hurting us and helping people on the other side who claim victimhood. हमारी तरफ से किसी ने जाके गाली दे दिया तो they'll make a note of it and say कि देखो, no, India is a very tough country, we can't even express our opinion, etc., etc. Which is why we came up with this whole idea of data reveals, where we said all we need to do is replace opinions with facts. And why am I saying replace opinions with facts? Because guess what? The truth is actually on our side. We don't have to counter one wrong opinion with another wrong opinion. We have to take an opinion which is fundamentally false and just bring truth out there and say, hey, you're a lazy journalist. That's it, right? And that's how, and that's why rather Data Reveals was formed. The website is datareveals.org, and I'll show you a little bit about it. But broadly, I'm going to give a 2-3 minute overview of Data Reveals. As I said, the objective is to just replace opinions with facts. So every time in Hollywood or in a stand-up comedy show or in a newspaper or a website, somebody says something about India, we go and say, look, we're not saying India is great or not great. All we are saying is we're taking that as, instead of a truth, we are taking it as a hypothesis. And let us just test it. If somebody says India is filthy, let us test it. If somebody says, oh, India has too many abductions, let us test it. If somebody says, Nirav Modi or Mehul Choksi paisa leke bhag jate hain and blah, 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 let's just test how many bankruptcies happen in India or how many people run away from India versus other countries. And if it shows India in a great light, great. If it doesn't show India in a great light, also great. At least we have facts that we're speaking with. Data Reveals, so Mohandas Pai, myself and Shashank Bhavaraju advise and guide Data Reveals. But more than us, I think I'd like to spend a minute on who I call the volunteers, which is a spin-off on volunteers. We have a very strong team from Luxembourg to Chennai to Delhi to Mumbai to Singapore, obviously. A very strong set of leaders that lead various verticals. And these are really the strength of Data Reveals. Right? We've run programs with Vanasthali Vidyapeeth and with Rashtra. And I'll tell you why I bring these two examples specifically. For those of you who don't know, Vanasthali is the oldest women's university in India. This women's university in India was set up when women in the West did not have a right to either vote or go to work. Aap sochiye, the so-called progressive Western world, women were still struggling to find some sense of identity for themselves. And at that point of time, India had Bharat mein Vanasthali was set up, which was meant specifically to teach women. Rashram, on the other hand, is one of the newest new age schools. It's only a couple of years old, focusing on public policy and public leadership. And that's the broad spectrum of partnerships we've had to run training programs. We've been blessed through these training programs where we teach people how to use data to bust these media narratives. We've had Professor Ghosh from IIM Ahmedabad, Ratanji Sharda, Nisha, Ashish Dhar and Ashish Chandorkar, who've come in as faculty and taught our analysts specific things. And mind you, all of these are open programs, free for registration. Right? There's nothing you need to commit other than your time and enthusiasm. We've also been blessed with people like, most of you might know, Garibo ka economist Ashutosh Muglikar. We have V.K. Raman, who used to head the BFSI vertical at TCS, Amritanshu Kumar, Gitika Upadhyay, Sridhar Gundrotu. Everyone has come in as a mentor to help people and teams build the skill to analyze data and to bust these narratives. Right. Quick list of everyone that graduated our training programs with distinction. More importantly, we realized at some point that, you see, I'd like to remind you to go back to those graphs you saw. One which busted the myth that India is the rape capital of the world. The other graphs which busted the myth that India is a really dirty and filthy place. Right. While we are putting all our data out there as a free resource for people to use, we are putting all the infographics and graphs out there. At the same time, we realized we needed to draw people in to change the narrative. This is people who might not chance upon us automatically. Right. Earlier this year, we organized Tathya, which was a huge conference. As you can see, we were honored to have Smriti ji and Suresh ji come in for the keynote addresses. But a whole bunch of people that are experts in their own fields to come in and discuss data with us, to discuss narratives with us, to discuss long-term solutions, not just complain, not just whine, not just crib about it, not just outrage, but to actually think of how we could make India be seen factually and fairly in the world's eyes. How do we get our fair share of due from people who might not have the ability or understanding to give it to us? We keep doing what we call data talks. I think this is once a month where we pick a topic. So, for example, when we were discussing Hollywood and Bollywood, we had Raveena Tandon and Vivek Agnihotri and Nikhil Singh Rajput coming. While discussing the Afghanistan situation, we had the former RAW chief Vikram Sood, Nitin Gokhale, Sushant Sareen, and I'll let you go through our. There's some fascinating videos we have on ecology, on how do you survive COVID, on Bollywood, on our defense situation, on new age governance, on new age narratives. There was a fascinating video that I myself was part of, a fascinating conversation with Anand Ranganathan and Shamika Ravi, where we busted all these happiness survey and democracy surveys purely on an academic basis. Right? We're not saying whether India is more democratic or less democratic than anybody else. Right? All we're saying is the way the survey was conducted was subpar at best. If this survey was done by an academic institution for a PhD or whatever, it would not have passed the test of peer review test. So we keep having these fascinating conversations, and you're welcome to join in those conversations sometimes. To summarize what we do, we conduct training to help people build the skills to look at news a little more critically rather than taking it on face value. Not just news, but media. We conduct analysis and do a lot of this narrative testing. We put infographics out there, and this is specifically for you as an audience. We put these infographics out there because every time you hear something being said about India, please go to Data Reveals and check if you've done an analysis. Then you'll be able to respond factually and powerfully in a way that nobody can prove you wrong. Right? It doesn't matter how powerful an author is, how famous a celebrity is. If they're saying something wrong, instead of going and giving them a gali, instead of abusing them, instead of labeling them, use a piece of information that disproves their competence. And that will not just be satisfying for you, that will be a sustainable response to the kind of narrative that builds against India. Right? And of course, data talks, which I talked about, once a month series. The interesting part about this, and this is where I'd like to put the bigger message out there. The interesting part about this, and this, by the way, is a common slide. Some of you know about the other project that I co-founded, the India Pride Project. I say this all the time about India Pride Project. Any of you that have attended my talks, that we've had no funding, no employees, and no authority. And it's the same principle here with Data Reveals. Not a rupee has come in, not a rupee has gone out. Right? Everything is done only by volunteers. And obviously, we have zero authority. And why I say this is because this is typically the set of excuses people use for inaction. lot of time people keep whining about something. They'll keep whining about it. They'll keep writing articles about it. They'll write books about it. They'll speak at lit fests. And then you ask them कि यार इसके बारे में आप कुछ कर क्यों नहीं रहे हो? Why are you not doing something about it? And they'll either say यार करना चाहता हूँ but पैसे नहीं है, or they'll say यार करना चाहता हूँ but कोई साथ नहीं दे रहा है, or they'll say यार करना चाहता हूँ but कोई करने नहीं दे रहा है. I'd like to, for those of you who don't know about India Pride Project, check out what we've achieved there. Check out what we've achieved at Data Reveals, and know that real change, real impact is possible even if you don't have any resources backing you. Magic happens when the right intent gets together, and that's a message I'd want you guys to take home, right? And if you don't believe me, here is a live example, and this is a part I want you guys to pay attention to, because I think this is literally the most interesting part of my talk today. You know, when we started Data Reveals, many people came to us and says, "Kya yaar, you're going up against huge media houses and Hollywood and publishing houses and all of that. You know, do you think this will actually work?" Right? There is so much of funding that is, that goes into making India look terrible. You know, they have 100-year history over us. अरे नहीं वो white privilege वाला lens है उनका, colonial lens है. They will never make a brown person look good, etc., etc. So for almost 6-8 months, if not a year, people kept telling us that this will not work, right? And here I'd like to show an example of how the team persevered to actually make things work, right? Those of you in India, obviously all of us have been following the COVID story. Look at what the narrative around COVID used to be, right? BBC goes out saying, does India have enough doses for all its adults, right? And this was as recently as 3rd August, right? NPR says, India is the world's biggest vaccine maker, but only 4% of Indians are vaccinated, blah, blah, blah. People were alleging that, India was supplying vaccines to the rest of the world, but didn't have enough for its own population, right? And Atlantic went to the extent of saying, why the world should worry about India. Nobody is talking about where the virus originally came from. But suddenly India is being made to look at as a villain, which the world should worry about. India is being made to look incompetent, that we can't vaccinate our own people. India is being made to look like a loser in the COVID narrative, where attention has shifted away from the source to one of the biggest victims of the pandemic. Right? Here is what we did. We simply got together and put the data out there, because people were only talking in terms of how much India has not done. Nobody was talking about what India has done in terms of building administrative capacity or vaccination capacity. Right? We said, okay, let's just do a quick research on how many days does it take to administer 1 crore doses or 10 million doses. India administers 1 crore doses in 1 day. What India does in 1 day, United States does in 11. UK does in 56 days. And New Zealand, which is a much touted model, does it in way over 100 days. Okay? Suddenly we had the world looking and saying, हाँ यार, ये तो बात तो सही है. COVID is as new for everybody else. All governments are as confused, don't know how to react. But look, India has been able to build a capacity that other countries can't even dream of or can't even come close to. I mean, kahan ek din, kahan 50 din ya 65 din ya 100 din, right? And here's what happened when we put this out there, and we did nothing with it. We did not hire a PR agency. We didn't, go to a news channel, nothing, right? On the 4th of September this year, we just tweeted this graph out. We are blessed to have a lot of well-wishers who take this information and spread it ahead. And I hope each of you is able to do that as well. Data RVLS are our handles on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, everywhere. So anyway, 4th of September, we put this information out there. On the 6th of September, we had MyGov republish very similar data. And the government put its weight behind pushing this narrative. Right? On the 13th of September, just a few days, not even 10 days later, BBC had to give in and acknowledge India's vaccination capacity. which you see is very interesting if you compare it to the news report earlier. And on the 18th of September, Barkha Dutt show discussed this whole thing, invited me, put the same graph out there, etc. And you see, when someone like Barkha goes out there talking about India's success in building capacity, you know the narrative has changed, right? From from Western media, blah blah blah, saying that the world is at risk about India, to talking about India's vaccination capacity is a big flip. And if you notice, after September 18th, starting September 4th, there has definitely been a change in the tone around India's vaccination capability, right? And finally, we have WHO approving our drugs, etc., etc. The reason I'm saying this is, when people ask us this question, will this actually work? I'd like you to see this and know that truth as an antidote, truth as a vaccine to narrative actually works. In fact, truth is the only vaccine or only antidote against narratives. It could be narratives against an individual, against a community, against a country. Doesn't matter, right? Why does this work as? I'll also ask you. I'll also tell you. Why does this work as a solution? It's not the first time India or the Indic culture or whatever is being held in terrible light. Right? It's been happening for decades. Right? The challenge I find personally, and this is where I'm going to be very blunt, and many people don't like me because I'm way too blunt. Right? I think we spend a lot of time complaining and whining and playing the victim card as much as we blame the other side. We spend a lot of time focusing on the problem. How could they say this about India? Shame on them. How dare you? Right? Or, who allowed so-and-so person to write an op-ed in so-and-so magazine? Right. So half the time, our jealousy, our insecurity, our frustration, which is natural for it to come out. I'm not saying no. Unfortunately, we stop there. We stop at discussing the problem, not discussing the solution. Right. We go on our WhatsApp group and say, "Acha, aapne article padha kya badtameez type ka likha hua hai?" You read a book where India is shown in a terrible light, and then you take a screenshot of that book and share it, etc., etc. मतलब पूरे की पूरी talks and conferences केवल outrage पे खड़ी कर देते हैं लोग, right? And I find that a little self-defeating, because that's exactly what the other side wants. The other side is, you see, in a narrative battle, in an ideological battle, the other side is trying to frustrate you. The other side wants to make you seem like a loser. The other side is overjoyed when you're angry, when you don't know how to respond, right? So please remember, as much as we cringe and outrage and all of that, for whatever cause you believe in, it could be right to education, it could be relocation of Kashmiri Pandits, it could be temple freedom, it could be whatever it is, right? As important as it is to talk about a problem, it is important to identify practical solutions that actually work and take inspiration from people that have implemented those solutions. Not people who have complained about it, ki sarkar kuch nahi kar rahi hai, humne to Modi ko vote de diya, how dare they? But actually focus on the idea of the karyakarta, karya, right? For those of you who attended my talks, I have a major bias for skin in the game. I have a major bias for doing over talking. And I hope that can be the one big takeaway, that success is possible if we focus on the solution and not the problem. Right? I'm hoping with time, we collectively are able to graduate or evolve from doing research to results. I'm hoping we can evolve from outrage to output. Right? I'm hoping we can evolve from whining all the time to actually winning some of these battles. Otherwise, we will remain a culture of people who kept losing one battle after the other. And every generation sat and documented and lamented the earlier generations in action. So I'm hoping we can collectively choose to make that change in whatever cause you believe. You see, I always give people the example of Kurukshetra. During Mahabharata, you didn't have the Pandavas saying, 100 to 5, hashtag unfair, right? You didn't have the Pandavas saying that, oh, there is a huge Kaurav conspiracy to bring down, this Raja. There was none of that happening. There was a small bunch of people who decided कि यार ये धर्म युद्ध है, इसको लड़ना है. When they did, they got the right mentorship. When they did, they got multiple clans and kingdoms that came and supported them. And in the end, they won. They won why? Because they decided to get into the ring and fight. They did not win because they sat in their rooms and give gali to the Kaurav. अरे तुमने द्रौपदी की साड़ी कैसे खींच दी, तुमको शर्म नहीं आती, so on and so forth. And I'm hoping each of us can find ways to collaborate, like you had the multiple kingdoms and clans supporting Pandavas during Mahabharata. I hope you guys can support each other. Of course, if you can support Data Reveals, great. If you have data, if you have analysis that can help change narrative, do send it to us. If you are out writing an article, posting something on Facebook, on Twitter, or whatever it is, do check out Data Reveals, because chances are we will have something that can help you change somebody's mind. And I think that is what is most important. Going back to the red and blue graph, if you remember, I think what's important is we move beyond our echo chambers, right? We move beyond our WhatsApp groups, our talk clubs, our lit fests, our conferences, our magazines, blah, 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 into changing minds on the other side. And that happens when you present fact and not an opinion. So I'm hoping we all can be in this Dharma Yudh together. Dhanyavad, Dhanyosmi. It's always a pleasure to have this conversation with like-minded people. Our website is datareveals.org. I'm going to leave this screen on for 30 seconds because I'd like each of you to take out your phones right now, or if you're on your laptops, go to Twitter, go to Insta, go to Facebook, go to @DataRVLS. @DataRVLS. RVLS is short for Reveals. And follow, subscribe, etc., whatever you need to do, so you can become a part of the conversation and you can be equipped with tools to have a powerful conversation where you move from labeling and abuse and name calling into proving the other person to be wrong. With that, thank you, and I guess open to Q&A, I suspect.
So we mostly find ourselves defending what I'm just going to call it the alternate narrative, which essentially, like you mentioned, may also be considered in the context of this particular conversation, perhaps the leftist narrative, which is inevitably led us to be on the back foot and just play defensive constantly. What I want to ask you is that, somebody who wants to have a skin in the game and somebody who wants to be proactive, what can one do proactively so that not only do we constantly find ourselves defending the alternate narrative, but continually building a right narrative, which is setting the precedence for, the world to see an alternate reality as well. मोस्टली हम लोग क्या करते हैं कि वो जो लेफ्ट जो बोल रहा है उसको, अरे इसने ये गलत बोला, ये देखो ये सही है, अरे इसने ये कैसे बोला, ये देखो ये सही है. बट क्या हमारे एक जो नैरेटिव बिल्डिंग है, दैट इज सो पुअर, even goes for the current government in power, very poor narrative building. So how can we sort of tackle that as just common citizens, like you mentioned?
Chainika, that's a beautiful question, Chainika ji. Now, so it's very interesting. I'd like to use the whole war analogy here, right? You need a flank that defends, you need a flank that plans, you need a flank that goes aggressive, right? And I believe that each of these flanks are going to come from very different spaces, right? Now, as far as India is concerned, and this is something I strongly believe, right? So, we were brutalized by people from the Middle East for centuries. Then you had colonizers coming from Europe, UK, blah, blah, blah. So if you look at us, we've been, raped, plundered, pillaged for centuries, right? And it's very common for people to suffer, for collective stress to set in. So I always say this, right? India suffers from collective PTSD, stress disorder. Now, when that has happened, it takes a while to just overcome that pain or that trauma. And I think that has started only in our generation. And this is why we are not able to speak as boldly as we deserve to speak, right? A lot of people like to blame, let's say, my parents' generation or our parents' generation. And I tell them, yeah, they were living in very different circumstances. Most of them were born while India was not yet independent or just after that. The ethos, the resource constraint, the money constraint, the job constraints at that time, they could not afford to think the way we do. Um, so I don't blame us for not having built institutions that could set the narrative. It is a direct outcome of two things. One is economic might, which India did not have till recently. Second is the amount of self confidence that we have collectively. So I don't blame us for not having built the institutions yet. What we can do is to show that the halo that others claim around their head is actually not bright. मतलब एक फर्जी मेड इन चाइना एलईडी लाइट है जिसकी वजह से जिसके आपको लग रहा है कि वो हेलो है, राइट? And when I say आपको, I mean any reader, any consumer. So I think we need to do both these things. There is a separate effort. Again, I'm not going to comment on the government and media and this and that. Look, everybody is doing the best they can. Why people are not being able to own the narrative, hold it by the horns and build the narrative they want to, I have no idea. While all that is happening, that will happen at multiple levels. That will happen at a diplomatic level, it will happen at a government level, it will happen at a private player level, it will happen at all levels. While that is happening, what we can do is to start calling out the lies and factually countering, and by the process, through the process, discrediting the other side who unfortunately has set the standard today. You see, if you're a disruptor, if you're new in the market, you will disrupt what is the set standard, right? Only if you disrupt a set standard can you create an alternate standard by yourself. And I think we're still at that phase. And these things are neither short nor easy. I mean, they take years and decades, perhaps even generations, to reverse that. I mean, the UK आज तक वो colonial time का पैसा बैठ के खा रहा है, right? And I'm not saying this is what the UK government says. I mean, they still have billions and billions of dollars in receipts for literally crimes they committed during colonial era. So this will take time, but you have to unseat an existing player to take his seat. And I think these have to be sequential in the beginning, then parallel processes, and then you focus on the narrative setting story. You start with breaking the other side's narrative, then you start building your own narrative, then there's no need for breaking the narrative, and then you build your own narrative. And I think that's going to happen. China has been through that journey already, if you look at it, over the last 20 years. I don't know, does that answer your question, China?
Thank you, Anuragji. I think the way you concluded it by saying that, it has to happen sequentially and you have to dethrone the current narrative builders to, build our own narrative. I think that helps. Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
सबसे पहले सबको दिवाली और गोवर्धन की बहुत-बहुत शुभकामनाएं. Anurag ji, my question, first of all, thank you so much for the initiative. And we could see that, we have seen that emotions always overpower us. It's a humane thing. However, if you have data and if you can present the data in a certain way, it does help you. My two questions would be, I've jotted it down, so just 1 second. One is, the lady before we talked about creating narrative. My question is on the same lines, but a little different. So I'm talking about narrative, which is the problem on the other side, which means, is the website also addressing or at least equipping people to understand that there are problems in other societies also? For example, race in US. The other one would be how the wokeism is taking over, has already taken over academia, is getting into judiciary and other places. So to understand the narrative, which is probably not relevant to India, but for people to understand that yes, there are other things also there, which you can use as a, I won't say as a ammunition against the other party, but at least for you to understand that you are not the only one who has issues, and we have issues. Every society has issues.
Yeah.
Second one will be to understand the global epidemic issues. So, for example, I will not shy away from saying that Delhi is unsafe, but then Delhi is as safe and as unsafe as any other city in the world. So to say that Delhi's rape capital would not be fair, but to come and defend Delhi altogether would not be right. So how would the audience understand the global narrative? So domestic violence is not prevalent to India. Data shows that during pandemic, when there was a lockdown, China has 300% increase in domestic violence, and it is not just China; it is also West out there. So, would the website also help the audience understand the global problems and understand that yes, we too have a problem, but then others also have the similar problem, and together, how do we come together and understand it? I don't know, cure it would be right thing or not, but yeah, to understand it at least. I hope you have got the question from my rambling.
I think I have got the questions. If my answer is not if I'm answering something else, then you'll probably have to come in again and repeat it for me. But let me take two things. Look, I'm really interested in your first question, right? I think you see, India doesn't weigh in enough on inadequacies of other societies, right? And I think honestly, we need to start doing that, not because it is the right thing to do, but because we should believe in reciprocity, right? If somebody in the UK thinks they have the right to hold a referendum on Khalistan, we should hold a referendum on freeing Ireland and Scotland and Wales from the from British rule, as they fought for it themselves for ages, and not very long back, around the same time as Khalistan, as the Khalistan movement or resistance. I do believe, there's a lot of pockets, unfortunately, and the good thing is, if we just wait long enough, and it won't be very long, a lot of these pockets from where this nonsense is coming out will self-destruct, right? 2 or 3 years back, I was watching a very interesting episode of Simpsons recently. If you think about it, right, Simpsons is a hardcore kind of California, Hollywood born, and you'd expect them to be totally bought into the woke narrative. And very recently, they had a 3-4 minute clip on how the villain goes to make a donation to his alma mater, which is Yale, and is faced by all these woke students, and he then decides कि नहीं boss, इनको मैं पैसा नहीं दे सकता. But when you see Simpsons mocking woke culture in universities, then you know कि boss, it's gotten too far, right? So I think a lot of it will self-destruct. Some of it needs to come from some of the showing of the mirror on issues like race, issues like wokeism, etc. Needs to come from India or from any. I like Jasodha. I hate this whole nomenclature of developed country and developing country. I like the whole idea of ascending nation and descending nation, right? An ascending nation will need to show a descending nation why they became a descending nation in the first place. And that time and place will come, right? On your second question on, and I think, sexual abuse is a great example of your second question. There are so many crimes which may not have much to do with a culture or community or a country, but it's attributed to these all the time. There are a lot, like crimes against women are a great example. Although there are certain communities, certain faiths where women's rights are consciously curbed, because of which crimes against women are way higher over there. At the end of the day, at a fundamental level, it is a gender crime. It is not a culture crime. It is not wholly a culture crime, not wholly a country-related crime. And when we put out data like the way we do, I'm sure it will help bust some of those narratives. But the thing I'd like you to remember is that Data Reveals is a community exercise. It's a crowdsourcing exercise. So the platform becomes as strong as people that contribute to it. So, for example, Jasoda ji, if you feel heavily about a particular issue, if you want to talk about, say, domestic violence during the pandemic, then by all means pull the data out, analyze it, and we'll publish it, we'll run it, we'll help push the data out there, we'll help advocate for the cause. And if you go to our website, right, you'll see it's not key we are trying to rara pro India only. There's a whole bunch of causes, there's a whole bunch of metrics where India is worse than other countries, and we've put it out there. Our job is to only put facts out there, and people can then use that to draw whatever conclusions they need to. But yes, I think as we grow, as we develop, as more and more people join us in our fight, we will get to the stage that you're talking about.
I was going through your whole lecture. What I found is you are stressing more on creating the counter narrative with the truth, the data. Now, my question is, why not we trace why this is happening? Who are the people? Who are helping the international platform to create those narratives? They are our own people. They have their, in the pretext of freedom of expression or whatever the international press, all these things. Why we don't have any control? Why we don't have? If I going back to the government governance or the IT rules, we are still stuck with the 67A IT Act. We have not done anything with that itself. So while you counter those things with the data, truth, everything is okay. But at the same time, don't you feel that we should have, because these macro narratives are a result of the micro narratives at the home. It doesn't come automatically. So, and these micro narratives are completely dependent on your political affiliation, your caste, religion, a lot of factors. You have a compulsion to believe those narratives. And while you are presenting the truth, the political narratives, political affiliation, your caste, religion, all these things, they dominate. Sometimes even the truth will fail.
I got the question.
Yeah.
So simple answer, Subhendu ji. Look, मैं छोटा आदमी हूँ. I'm a small guy. I do not have the temerity to ask why is government not doing their job, why is USA not doing their job, why is media not doing their job, why is activists not doing their job, why is UN not doing their job. I am sitting here asking what can I do. In my limited capacity, I have two choices. I can either say why is somebody else not doing their job and keep complaining for years or end others are not doing their job, or I can fix the problem that I see. Okay? And again, I'm not saying that's the right approach. All I'm saying is that is my approach, which for me has worked in the past, delivering on what cause I care for. So as a simple example, for those of you who know me in my with the other cause I believe in, India Pride Project, there were a lot of people who for many years they've made a career out of complaining why is the government not. So for those of you who don't know India Pride Project, it's a project to build the case that our heritage needs to come back home. It's a very simple thing. Our mandir se murti chori ho jati hai, fort se, museum se kuch chori ho jata hai. We build the case and make sure that heritage that belongs to certain communities, certain places that has been taken away is brought back. That's it, right? For years and decades before we started India Pride Project, people had made a career out of complaining, boss, why is this museum keeping this murti? Why is our government not asking for that murti back? Why is that government not offering this murti back? Why is police not filing an FIR? Why is reporter not reporting a crime? People have made fan followings. They've given talk after talks. They've written books and earned a lot of royalty. They consider themselves to be filmy heroes, the whole Rajnikant syndrome, out of doing what? Out of just complaining for years. But nothing ever happens. So my view on this is very simple. Before I have the right to ask somebody else why are they not doing this or that or the other, I have to ask, am I doing what I can do within my capability to solve that problem? If someday the government takes it up, if someday the United Nations takes it up, or media takes it up, or Press Club of India or whatever takes it up, then great. Till that time, we are fighting our battle. Till that time, we are ensuring that the right thing happens, like it happened with our vaccination narrative. You see, for the last year and a half, everybody had been abusing India, using extremely creative journalism, right? And just by putting a little bit of effort into it, we were able to change that narrative. And I'd like to focus on what it is possible for us to do when we choose to do it. Otherwise, though, every morning on WhatsApp, guaranteed you'll get two things, boss. एक तो गुड मॉर्निंग जय श्री कृष्ण मैसेज मिलेगा आपको, दूसरा आपको कोई कंप्लेन मिलेगा, right? Oh, beyond the point, we are too old to focus on all those things here.
So today, when you refer to platforms like Republic or Op India, then it is not considered scholarly even in colleges and universities for being biased towards right. And even I completely not denying that. And but when it comes to the print or wire or NDTV, the first impression is that these are neutral and hence should be referred. So is the right doing any fundamental mistake in establishing themselves as a credible source for a layman?
You see, right or wrong should only be judged on the merit of the output. The proof of the pudding is in eating it, right? If you're not getting the results you wanted, then clearly there is a better way of doing something. That's how I believe it, right? अगर आप कॉफी बना रहे हो और आपको जम नहीं रही है, तो या तो उसमें दूध का क्वांटिटी चेंज करना है, या चीनी का, या कॉफी पाउडर का, या पानी का, या टेम्परेचर चेंज करना है, या टेक्सचर चेंज करना है. So I think, so there is, you see, at some point we need to stop pegging ourselves. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who you are. At some point you have to stop pegging yourself to a baseline that somebody else is setting on the other side of the ideological spectrum. And we need to stop being jealous of the kind of validation they get. Let them get the kind of validation they do. We have to figure out how we can strengthen our institutions to become stronger than any benchmark anybody has ever set. Right. So again, we can't change the nature of the university system, the peer review system, the way journals are published, the way, it's decades and decades of an advantage the other side has built. With time, I'm hoping that our institutions can learn how to build a similar advantage. I hope we can all be ambitious, like people on the other side have been. And I hope that can happen.
So another question is, why we as Bharat are being targeted? Is it because of religion, economy? What are your thoughts on it?
You see, I think the world has realized that they've missed the bus with China, right? The West realized very late, by the time they realized it, China had already become huge, right? I don't think they want to make that mistake with India, given that they very recently, in the last couple of decades, made it with China. Whether we like it or not, geopolitics is alpha male in its very nature. It's full of type A personalities. They look at every interaction and every conversation as a competition, right? So all of us has that friend, if you say कि यार Saturday को मैंने एक picture देखी, वो बोलेगा यार मैंने तो दो picture देखी. Then you have that friend who you go and say, last night I had, मैं 20 पानी पूरी खा गया. Your friend tells you कि मैं तो 25 खा गया. So unfortunately, geopolitics is filled by people like that who want to compete without knowing what they're competing for. When you look at a lot of metrics in terms of trade, in terms of GDP, in terms of healthcare, education, a whole bunch, China has moved at a pace where the West could not imagine. And I think they're watching India very closely to say, hey, are we losing our position to India? You see, 2 years back, India overtook UK to become the 5th largest economy in the world. That's a very big move. Yeah? Think about it. Within one generation, a country that colonized you is smaller than you. That's huge progress. Huh? And if you become a $5 trillion economy, trillion dollar economy, that becomes a bigger progress. So you see why there is a lot of resistance to India achieving its potential, and it is bound to be there. It is absolutely bound to be there. And again, like I said, it doesn't even happen at a country level. It happens at an individual level, right? You see, there are, personally, I can tell you, right? And I'm not just talking of me. I'm talking of people who I hugely respect. The minute they start becoming relevant, you suddenly start hearing gossips and rumor about them, right? व्हाट्सएप पे कोई फोन करके बोलता है कि अरे तूने सुना क्या कि ये ऐसा है वैसा है, काइंड ऑफ स्टफ, राइट? द वर्ल्ड इज स्मॉल एंड यू फाइनली गेट टू नो कि कौन किसके बारे में क्या बोल रहा है, कौन कितना इनसिक्योर है, दिस एंड दैट. बट the insecurity because of which individuals are pulled down is the same insecurity because of which nations are also pulled down. And that is something we should expect. We should not fret it. We should not complain about it. We should be happy that it is happening. The fact that somebody is investing their energy in trying to pull you down means you must be relevant. You are unsettling them in some way.
Absolutely, Anuragji. Next question is there any change in the level after 2014 when a rightist government came to power? Is there any study to prove that?
See, first of all, I don't understand the idea of rightist and leftist, right? I hate calling myself rightist or leftist. It is an archaic construct. It is a French construct. It is irrelevant to India. And I hope we stop calling ourselves right wing or left wing or the other, right? It has no bearing or relevance to any of us, not just to Indians, but to any Asians for that matter. The way I look at it, the question itself is irrelevant. School में कुछ questions में बोल देते थे ना, data insufficient. So this is one of those data insufficient questions. I don't know what you mean by rightist or leftist government. But of course, doesn't matter how you define political ideology. And it's not unique to India. We somehow feel that we suffer the most, right? A Republican president comes into power, the Democrat publications become active. A Democrat president comes, the Republican publications become active. It happens all over the world. It's happening in Ghana as we speak right now. So I don't know why we get very worked up about it and we feel that somehow we are the only victims of a narrative battle and all of that. It's not the case at all. I mean, ये हर घर में होता है, हर classroom में होता है, हर group of friends में होता है, and it happens at a national and international level as well. We just have to figure out how we emerge victorious, and instead of we just have to figure out how we make it work for us and not question whether it is happening or not, because it has always happened. It has literally always happened. I mean, Ramayana Mahabharata ke time, we're talking of 3,000 some years back. You had enough people there building narratives against people that were righteous, and that's how it worked. And then a counter narrative as well, ki Ashwathama mara gaya. It will be narrative building here.
Sir, I have a question that how do we tackle narratives like, say, the leftist people propagate that certain XYZ community dari hui hai, right? And they put out cab stories, right? Like today I met a cab driver and he said XYZ and I don't feel safe in this country. So how do you tackle that kind of narrative? Right? It's you can't quantify it, but we have to tackle that kind of narrative, right? So how can we quantify it and tackle that narrative, because there is no data for it?
Yeah, so unfortunately, this is one of the, I won't say one of the reasons Data Reveals was founded, but one of our foundational principles was, I hope we can show the power of data enough so that FIRs in India start capturing all the fields of information that can be analyzed, right? Everything from education level to religion to age, to any kind of information. There could be 40, 50 fields of data that could match up, that should matter. Otherwise, I think honestly, my personal view, right? All this, I met a cab driver and my Kamali Bai told me so and all of that. I think that has run its course. I mean, people are able to see through that nonsense already, and I would say, let people keep doing that, because in a way they're ending up mocking themselves, right? I mean, if you're a world famous economist and your primary source of data is a cabbie, you see, forget when I went to business school and this and that, right? Back in school and college, we were taught about anecdotal information, right? That we were taught about things like sample size, right? Sample size. How do you calculate a sample size? If you're talking about a country the size of India, with 1 billion plus people, what is the sample size you take before figuring out if somebody is dara hua or not? Now, if an economist or a journalist or an author or whoever is saying my sample size is 1, my driver, my tailor, my Kamali Bai, whatever. If my sample size is 1, based on which I'm coming up with this mega conclusion, then let them paint their incompetence all over town. Why do you have to stop them?
Next up, we have a question wherein the person is asking you to clarify on current issue like industry contribution in GDP. How is it letting the GDP down? So if you have any data to share on that aspect.
Unfortunately, I don't have data off the top of my head. But yeah, that's perhaps something we should be analyzing. In fact, one of the goals I've set for 2022 is for us to get financial data on GDP data, on growth, growth by industry, and especially by industries which are originally indigenous to Bharat. On bankruptcies, on taxation, on transmission losses, taxation losses. So 2022 I hope we'll be focusing there. But again, I invite you, if that's a specific area of interest or focus you have, we'll be more than happy to host your data when you get in touch with it. And I see that Shashank Bhavaraju is on this call as well. In fact, he's really the axle or the strength behind Data Reveals. You should reach out if you have data that we could host, or on GDP or industry contribution, etc. We'll be more than happy to host it.
You explained how propaganda and fake news can be busted with the help of facts. So similarly, is there any specific way through which selective reportage or media houses, they can also be tackled?
Look, there are a couple of levels at which this can happen. One is at an institutional or a government level. The other can happen at at a private player level. What can we do? I believe because of the socialist nature of India, we tend to always lean on the government and expect कि boss आप solution provide करोगे, right? You see, the government has done a lot. I mean, look, take an example of the Prasar Bharati news service, right? It's headed by this dynamic man, Samir Kumar. It's become an alternative to biased, news services. If you see how the news service, I'm not talking about newspapers and magazines. I'm talking about news services, which are businesses that provide base news to newspapers and magazines. Usi level pe ye selective reporting, there used to be a lot of selective reporting. And Prasar Bharati News Service is correcting that at some level. At the other level, I think we should just keep calling it out. And we should call it out politely, factually, and firmly. Instead of labeling, instead of calling names, instead of saying, instead of alleging this, that, and the other, we should use facts or data whenever we can and say, hey, by the way, in fact, be super polite. Say, boss, I don't know if it is intentional or if you're actually ignorant, but here is what the full picture looks like. And interestingly, we've done it multiple times. I mean, there was, actually, I won't share names, but I'll give you a real example. There was one particular journalist who wrote about India in a foreign newspaper recently. well, not recently, it's been a few months back. This was around the Kathua incident, right? On how the Indian establishment has let down its women and all of that. And a lot of people on Twitter just went and posted the graphs that I showed you earlier today. And said, you know what, the establishment is not letting down women. This is a crime that one gender perpetuates on the other. And interestingly, this is a crime that even the other gender perpetuates, so it's very interesting. Like for me, I felt enlightened to find out that there are many women that are also convicted of rape, not just accused. And we said, look, this is a mental sickness or a mental disorder. This has nothing to do with whether Indian or Malaysian or Australian or whatever it is. Now when this person went and wrote, did this whole selective reporting, average users on Twitter and whatever like yourself went and responded to it using data, and very quickly the narrative that this person was trying to build was busted. And I can't tell you much of what happened in the background, but what I can tell you is that it did make an impact. It did make a very, very strong impact, right? The same thing, for example, is happening now with this whole Diwali nonsense, right? You see IIT and TERI, which is the largest, it's one of the most reputed bodies. IIT and TERI have already done their analysis and put out data that Diwali crackers are not even in the top 10 contributors to smoke and smog and pollution at this time, right? Not even in the top 10. Forget top 1 or 2, right? But narrative for the last so many years कि अरे दिवाली की वजह से ये issue हो रहा है, right? So much so that Supreme Court is basing their opinion on all this kind of information, when the scientists are actually saying it is not true, right? Now, what has happened over the last few days? We and others have put out information saying, no, look at the contribution because of crop burning in Punjab, and look at the contribution of Diwali crackers here. And suddenly that narrative is being set right now. And even mainstream media has already started saying, I saw a report on NDTV today. They were talking about how 32% of if I remember correctly, 32% of Delhi pollution is coming from the crop burning happening in Punjab. So the narrative will change once you start calling it out using facts, using data. You see, because an opinion, anyone can counter, right? If I ask you what's your favorite color and you say blue, I can say, nahi yaar, blue kyun hai, orange kyun nahi ho sakta, right? But if I ask you which is the most used color on clothes, let's say, right? And you give me a bar graph that says, okay, blue is the most used color, then it's very tough for me to fight with you after that. झगड़ने के लिए कुछ बचता ही नहीं है. And I think that conversation needs to move, and it's very easy to bust out selective reporting. I mean, very, very easy.
I think there's one suggestion. It's not a question. So the person is saying they need an analysis of suicides in the last 2 years, where profession, age, and reason-wise analysis can be drawn out of it.
So there is already some analysis done on suicide rates across countries. But again, like I said, right, I mean, Data Reveals is a platform. If you feel that analyzing a particular metric will add value to you and to the larger community, by all means, please make that analysis, send it to us. We will validate it. We will put it in a nice graph. We will publish it. Of course, we will attribute it to you as the author. But if you think data on suicide rates according to age, profession, whatever is important, then by all means do conduct that analysis, send it to us. We will host it. We will give you credit for it, and hopefully it will change 10,000 minds once you do.
Yes, sir. It was a very enlightening session. I totally enjoyed it, and I'm sure I am saying that on the behalf of everyone in the audience.
Yeah, you enjoyed it because we are all in the Deepavali spirit, right? So therefore we enjoyed it. In the Deepavali spirit, I'll end by saying कि जब लंका का नाश कर रहा था ना, then Hanumanji did not sit on top of the mountain or on the seaside saying कि यार रावण ऐसा क्यों कर रहा है, रावण के पास इतना पैसा क्यों है, राइट? सब लोग रावण को पंडित मानते हैं, बट देखो रावण इतना घटिया आदमी है, मैं रावण के बारे में परसेप्शन कैसे चेंज करूं? हनुमान didn't do any of that stuff, right? He said, boss, सीता मैया है मेरी, अनादर हुआ है, इसको ठीक करना है, मैं क्या कर सकता हूं, what can I do to make sure that we earn back or take back the respect that has been taken away from us. So I hope at the end of this we are all able to do that for whatever cause you believe in. As far as Data Reveals is concerned, I hope you're able to help us through articles, through information, etc., and leverage us, use us as much as you can. That's when, instead of a bunch of outraged, angry, frustrated victims, we start looking like very intelligent, calm, composed, dignified people that can counter the narrative, and that will scare the other side so much. Trust me, you can't believe how much that scares the other side.
My question is very simple. I still have to visit the data. I've opened up the website, but I'll go through it in detail. When you said generate the data, so does it mean that one has to generate the data and do the analysis, or can the analysis be done on an existing data? Which means, do I have to go and do a survey and then do an analysis on it, or can it be done on data published by a reputed firm, of course?
So we have two categories of analysis that we do. Primarily, we focus our analysis only on official data. Official means 3 or 4 sources: governments, United Nations, World Bank, primarily. Government could also mean government agencies. It could be courts, it could be enforcement agencies, it could be various ministries, etc., etc. There are some like World Bank, ADB, etc. So the reason we do it is so that we don't have to struggle with whether data is authentic or not. So that's the primary source of our data. In some cases, we also look at secondary data, which other credible people have published, but then we tag it as data bytes, which is, so we tag it and say, okay, this graph is not from official government or United Nations data. This is from another source of data. But if you'd like to conduct analysis, I can see in the chat box here, Shashank has just posted, dropping us a mail at hello@datareveals.org. There is also a participate tab on our website, which will tell you exactly how you can get involved. But yeah, trust me, there is just so much data out there that is begging to be analyzed, that you actually don't have to conduct surveys, and so you don't have to go creating data, looking for it, etc., etc. There is just so much out there that is waiting to be analyzed. You'll be surprised when you start looking.